So now I would like to have you help me welcome Scott Henning, Pastor Pete's good friend, who's going to bring us the message this morning.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Scott Henning, and my wife Christy, she was here at first service with me. She teaches transitional kindergarten. She was a special ed teacher, but she does that now. And we've been hanging out for 35 years, that girl and me. So anyway, that's a little bit about that. But you need to know I just belong to the Pastor Pete fan club. And I'll tell you why I belong to the Pastor Pete fan club. Because as I've experienced Pete Shaw, he loves mercy. He's a gentle, kind, good man to people. Secondly, he lives justly. And he'll even fight in a quiet way for justice, for what's right and what's just. So he lives rightly. And then finally, I experience him as a man who's humble before God. And for those reasons, I am in the Pete Shaw fan club. So anyway, I just wanted you to tell you, reinforce how lucky you guys are to have such a great man to be your pastor, and hope you're as grateful for him as I am his friendship. Yeah, so anyway, so here we are today, and you talked about a question to each other, with each other, and that question was recalling a time when life, as you knew it, was disrupted. Now, I probably sense you told each other about an event, but there was also an emotion attached to that time. What was that emotion? What was the emotion that went with that experience? And there's the wide range. It might have been a happy one. It might have been a hard one. My emotion was loneliness. What was your emotion? Just can blurt. Permission to blurt. Right. So you met, Pastor Pete started a series on being changed 6 weeks ago now. And he's using the life of Daniel and the story of Daniel in the Old Testament of the Bible to help you think about what it means to be changed. And he couldn't have picked a better story and a better person. Here's why I think that's true. Daniel experienced a disruption of life like I can't even hardly begin to imagine. The Babylon, when he was just a boy, maybe a teenager, but around that age. Babylon conquered Israel. Jerusalem was devastated. The temple was completely destroyed. And Daniel and his people were led to various parts of the empire. That's how the Babylonians did it, separate people so they don't lose their identity as slaves. The book of Daniel was written by a Jewish person, so he called themselves exiles. But the Babylonians would have called them slaves. It was the custom of kings of that time to look among the captives for young men, older boys, that they could take into their court and their government system. They looked for the ones who stood above their peers. They had to be intelligent. They were probably educated in their own culture already. They had to be good looking. Kings wanted their court to look good when it was picture time. They had to have good attitude. And Daniel fit the bill. So he and other boys, young men, teenagers, were taken into the court. And the first thing they were doing is their identity was changed. They lost their old Jewish name and they were given a Babylonian name. Daniel was emasculated. He would never return to his home. He would never see his family again. He could never go to Jewish temple or synagogue again. His culture was torn away from him. And he probably wasn't 18 yet. I don't know if you can imagine the emotion for a moment you might feel if that was you. But that was 6 weeks ago. Today we're to Daniel chapter 6. And Daniel has now served in the Babylonian government under 2 kings. And we know that from the rise of the Babylonian government to the fall of it was 70 years. Chapter 6 starts, well, chapter 5 ends with Daniel being promoted to second to the king, in charge of the whole empire. He's given a purple robe and a pennant to go around his neck. And then, whether it's that night or shortly after that, the empire of Babylon is conquered by the Persians. And so there's a change of government, a new king, Darius, Cyrus. We're not sure who it was, but becomes the new leader. And now for the third king, Daniel is recognized as a person who has a good attitude, an outstanding work ethic, is intellectual. And so the new king, Darius, includes Daniel in his top 3 government officials. Daniel is now served 3 kings, probably for 70 years. We know the rise of the Babylonian Empire to the fall of it was about 70 years. He's an old man today. And yet the new king still recognizes in Daniel that he had a great attitude, a great work ethic, one that outstripped all of his peers. And so the king, the new King Darius, decided it was time to promote Daniel to be in charge of the whole empire. Darius didn't want the bother of it. He just wanted the royalty. So he's going to put Daniel in charge. Well, you know how it goes in politics. Daniel's cohorts are jealous. And so they start making phone calls to dig up dirt on Daniel to find out what in the world they can figure out he's done behind the scenes that they can bring up to disqualify him. They can't. His behavior has been exemplary. His service to the empire has been exceptional. And so they say the only way we're going to get this guy is he is known for his faith. And we know that he won't compromise on his faith. They come up with a great plan. It is just a perfect plan. Darius is a new king trying to establish himself in the kingdom. He set up, reorganize a kingdom to do it fast so you keep all these new conquered people under control. He sets up 3 people under him and 120 satraps under them to govern the empire. It was big, biggest one in history at that point. And he intends to put Daniel in charge of all of that. But the jealous satraps come up with a plan. And that plan is that they will promote Darius's status. And how do they do it? They go to Darius and say, "Oh, King, we think that for the next 30 days, we should declare you as God, kind of Pharaoh-like. And that we should order everyone only to pray to you." Now, it was kind of good for his ego, but it was also good for his position at getting control of all these conquered peoples. And so Darius agrees to the plan. It sounds like a good plan. Well, when the Persians, jump back in history, when the Persians had conquered the Medes, it was less conquer and more of an alliance, kind of a little of both. And so in the Persian government, there were Medes and there were Persians. And to keep things flowing smoothly, they had come up with a legal system that they called the laws of the Medes and the Persians. That way everybody had a voice. And they had decided when the Medes and the Persians would agree, the king couldn't go against it. So they say to King Darius, they say, "King, we think that this is one of those kind of laws that is so important that it should be a law of the Medes and the Persians." And King Darius says, "Yeah, I'm all for it." So signed as into stone, unchangeable, there is a new ordinance that for 30 days we can only pray to King Darius, our new God King. Well, the story tells us that Daniel then became aware. Obviously, he wasn't included in the conspiracy. He becomes aware and he sees the postings around town that now there is a new law. Daniel doesn't protest. He doesn't do anything different. What does it say he does? It says that Daniel did what he always did. We'll read the text. It's there in front of you. When Daniel learned that the decree had been signed and posted, he continued to pray just as he had always done. So Daniel went to his house. 3 times a day he went to his house. And he had windows up in the upstairs that opened toward Jerusalem. And 3 times a day he knelt there in prayer, thanking and praising God. It wasn't a protest, it was what he had always done. But they knew it. That's why the conspirators could get him. They knew that this was non-negotiable for Daniel. And so the conspirators catch him praying and run back to King Darius and, polishing his shoes. They say, "Oh, King Darius, live forever. And by the way, do you remember that you made a law the other day? And it's not just your law. We signed it into the law of the Medes and the Persians so that no one can change it, that no one should pray to anyone but you." King says, Yep, I did it. They said, "Well, that slave, Daniel, we caught him praying to his God." King Darius was distraught. You got to remember, he was fond of Daniel. He recognized Daniel's contribution. And so the story says that the king spent the day, he called all of his best lawyers together and said, "What can we do?" And they worked all day in an attempt to find a loophole to the law. Later that night, the conspirators came back and said, "Oh, King Darius, remember, you agreed to make it a law of the Medes and the Persians signed in stone, and you can't even change it." The king recognized his mistake, and he called Daniel. And as he was about to send Daniel to the lion's den, King Darius said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you trust so completely, save you from the lions." And the story says that they put a stone on top of the den's hole, the entryway, and they signed it with the king's signet, and all the satraps signed it with their signets. Oh, by the way, did you know the Medians had a little cliche, satraps, living like a satrap, which meant you lived in luxury and licentiousness. They had a reputation. They all sealed it, and Daniel went to the lions. The story says that King Darius couldn't sleep that night. He didn't eat that dinner that night. And in fact, he fasted all night long and prayed. And at daybreak, he rushed from the palace back to the den. And he called out and said, "Daniel, did your God who you serve save you from the lions?" And Daniel's reply it just tells you so much about him. His first words were, "King Darius, may you live forever." Yes, my God sent an angel and shut the mouths of the lions to prove that I was innocent of doing any wrong against you. And as the story goes, then the conspirators were thrown to the lions, and their fate wasn't nearly so good. And King Darius made it a proclamation that everyone should pray and worship the God of Daniel who had saved him. So often when we tell that story, we focus on the miracle of the lion's den. But I kind of think there's a bigger miracle that's happened in the background. And it's the one that I think fits with the theme Pastor Pete has chosen, being change. And the question for me, and you can go to the next slide. I think we skipped a slide. Would you go back to the one before the Bible verses? One more back. One more back. Yeah, thank you. The question that came to me is, what in the world sustains Daniel for over 70 years, enabling him to continue to be change in his time? Did you imagine with me when I began this morning, thinking back when he was ripped from his homeland, when his body was violated, when he would never see his family again, when he would never go back to his homeland again, when he was pulled from all of the things of society that he was used to, and when he wouldn't even, because he had been emasculated, he would never be welcomed back in a Jewish temple again or the synagogue. Everything was ripped from him. Could you imagine how you would have felt? I would have been angry. And so as I thought about Daniel, now 80 years old, faithfully serving foreign kings, these weren't kings of his own country. This wasn't in his homeland. He was a slave, forced to serve somebody else. How in the world did he keep such a good attitude? Why did he give himself so enthusiastically to it? What caused him to be changed? What enabled him? And I think the story tells us, and I want to read those verses again so we can go back to the next slide. When Daniel learned the decree had been signed and posted, he continued to pray, just as he always had done. Next slide. His house had windows in the upstairs that opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day he knelt there in prayer, thanking and praising his God. Next slide. So Daniel spent regular time alone with God. I think that was his key. I think it's what I think Daniel understood that I so often forget is that my soul needs to be nourished just as much as my body needs nourishment. I don't miss breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Why do I think that I can live, I can be changed? Why do I think that I'll have the strength and the nourishment and the resolve and the sustainability without re-nourishing my soul regularly? The orders had been posted, and Daniel did what he always had done. Because, especially now, he knew that in this new challenge, he was going to have to strengthen his soul again, and it would take nourishment. You know, in society, sometimes in our families, our very person is challenged. We're only valued if we bring some sort of value to the family. We're only valued if we please our boss or our teachers. We're only valued in society for what we contribute, not for just who we are. If you and I hope to be changed, like Daniel was changed, I think we're going to have to spend regular time with God. What does that look like? Go to the next slide, would you? I think it begins with listening. All conversations are two-way, right? And I begin my conversation with God, and I want to hear God's voice. Now, that doesn't mean, I'm hearing voices, because I never have. I've never heard God speak to me audibly. Some people talk about that. I've never heard that. So my wife, Christy, and I do this thing every week thanks to computers. We have the Bible verses printed out for each day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, because I want to listen to God. And I kind of like to stick them in my pocket so I can pull them out throughout the day and pay attention again. And what do I do when I listen? I listen for one thing. What does God say? Something about God's character. Because if I know God is merciful, then I know he wants me to be merciful. And I wondered if I was merciful in that last conversation I had with somebody, or the way I treated somebody to this morning. Or I look for a promise that God makes, because sometimes I need to hold on to a word from the one who loves me. Or sometimes I look for a character trait that needs to be challenged in me, and I hear a word of correction. I go, oh man. So I have this habit most days. This is why it's so intentional for me, because it's got to be intentional if I'm going to do it. And I've got to keep it close. Bible on a shelf is a little bit too far away for me, because I want to listen to God's voice. I think Daniel went to that room to listen for God's voice. He heard all the other voices. He lived in a culture that had nothing to do with his God. He wanted to listen for God's voice. Secondly, what else did he do? What's in this next slide? I think he went there for intimacy. There is nothing better to be known in my weaknesses and in all my vulnerability. Now, in society, I don't let you see that. We're always self-promoting. Oh man, just read anybody's Facebook page. It's all about self-promotion. I'm sorry, but it is, right? We don't put our junk out there. I'll never forget in the later 80s when my brother-in-law came to us and came out, told us he was gay and that he had AIDS. And at that time, there weren't a lot of programs, so he came to live with us because we were close to San Francisco where there was a treatment program. And one day, as we were sitting on the bed together, talking, in the last year of his life, he said to Christy and I would never have wished this illness on my worst enemy. But the first time in my life, you know everything about me, and you still love me. You see, I think Daniel, and I know I, go to that quiet place with God for intimacy. It's there I can bring my there's no secrets with God. I can bring that vulnerable part of my life that I don't know what to do with. And I know that there I will still be cherished. Yeah, you were right in changing the slide. Go ahead and change it. Because I hear God say to me, you are my beloved, you please me. Do you remember when Jesus was baptized? The story account in the gospel goes like this. He went down to the water, and a voice from heaven came and said in front of everybody, that's the picture you get. A voice from heaven said to Jesus, you are my beloved Son. I'm pleased with you. Do you ever go to that quiet place with God and listen for his voice? Because in that quiet place, I hope you hear the Lord say to you, you are my beloved. I am pleased with you. You are his beloved children. He is pleased with you. And regardless of what you feel, the pressure and the culture around you, and if you don't feel accepted or you feel somehow exiled or alienated or isolated, whoa, it's in that quiet place, in that room, wherever it is that you go to be alone with God, that I hope above all hopes you can hear his voice over and over saying, you are my beloved, you please me. The next slide will tell you there's another reason why we go there. We go to that room to pray for others. And I can only imagine that day after Daniel saw that posting and he realized he had been betrayed by his counterparts, that his prayer for the others would have to be a prayer for forgiveness. You know, you've been hurt. We've all been hurt. It's hard to forgive. It's really hard to forgive. But I have found in my life that when I pray for the person that I'm angry at, it's easier to forgive. And I find that the longer I pray for them, and sometimes it takes me a long time because I'm slow at this stuff. After I pray for them for a long time, it gets way easier to love them even regardless of how they have behaved or continue to behave. And you see, if we are going to be changed, we're going to be the forgivers. We're going to let go of the anger. You know, when Jesus talked to his disciples and told that parable and then said these words, how many times do you think you should forgive? 7 times? And he said, no, 7 times, 70 times. And then he went on to ask this question. What do you think you're going to do with your anger if you don't forgive? What are you going to do with it if you keep holding on to it? What good's it going to be for you? It's no good. There's no value. There's no advantage. And if you and I are going to be change agents in our families and in our culture, it will be because we go to that quiet place and we take our anger out and we say, God, you're going to have to help me forgive. And we release the people that we think owe us a debt of their debt. Yeah, in that quiet room, we pray for others. Pray for others. Next slide, please. Lastly, in case you were afraid I wasn't going to let you go home for lunch today. In that quiet room, we remember our hope. So, I don't know if you paid attention to the scripture, but it said he went to a room in his house upstairs that faced Jerusalem. Jerusalem was devastated 80 years ago now, 70 years ago. For Daniel, there's no temple left. It was totally destroyed, burned to the ground. What's he looking toward Jerusalem for? Today's the first Sunday of Advent. Expectant hope is what Advent means. Expectant hope. We expect and we're waiting with confident hope. What are we waiting for? What was Daniel looking toward Jerusalem for? Well, he was looking toward Jerusalem not because he had faith in Jerusalem, because he had faith in God. You see, he had remembered the stories too. Abraham, how God had been faithful. How God had sent Moses to deliver the people of Israel from the slavery in Egypt. It happened. By the way, perspective. The people of Israel were slaves in Egypt for twice as long as America has been a nation. They never quit hoping. So Daniel looks back and says God was faithful to them. Even though Daniel never saw Jerusalem restored, Daniel never saw the temple rebuilt, he was confident that the God who loved him and his people, the one who called him you're my beloved child, would be faithful, even if, especially when you can't see what you're expecting. And so today, on this first Sunday of Advent, by the way, Happy New Year. It's the first day of the Christian New Year. When we celebrate all the wondrous ways God has worked, throughout history to be faithful to people, to bring change, and to deliver them from their exile. You are his beloved children. You please God. And I believe that you and I can be change in our culture if we don't forget to nourish our soul regularly. That's what Daniel did. I think that's how he could do it. This morning, I want to ask you to stand. Would you stand? And I want you to do something. I want you to find somebody in the room. Some of you are going to have to move if you're sitting at a table by yourself, or if there's three. Find somebody in the room to go and look in their eyes. And as you look in their eyes, say to them, you are the beloved of God. God is pleased with you. Can you do that? Will you do that? You need to be Jesus. You need to be Christ for your sister or brother today.
Closing prayer.
Okay. Oh, you want me to do it? I'll do it after. All right. while you're standing, or you can sit again, I just want to join us together with the words that can we just pause for a moment? We'll pray together. In this moment, in this room, as a group of people, we look to you, the one who called yourself the Good Shepherd, who loves his sheep, the one who called himself the mother hen who gathers her chicks under her wings. We look to you because our hope is in you. We look to you because you alone can nourish our souls. And we look to you because it's in your presence that we hear your voice. Remind us that you love us and that you are pleased with us as children. Amen.